As the mind becomes more subtle, the practice becomes more subtle. And as the mind becomes more subtle, it becomes more and more, it tends more and more towards sattva. When the mind first becomes sattvic, which is peaceful, the mind becomes peaceful. So if you hear me say sattvic, you're not sure what I mean. I just mean peaceful, quiet, alert, vibrant, and quiet. That dynamic piece as opposed to the dull piece. As the mind becomes more peaceful, when it first becomes peaceful, it's mixed in with tamas and rajas. Rajas is the agitation, the active mind, and tamas is the dull, lethargic, depressed mind. It's mixed. So we call that mixed sattva. It's mixed in with tamas and rajas. And as the tamas and rajas go and go and go, that it becomes more and more pure sattva. And this is when the practice becomes like a non-practice. At this level, it becomes spontaneous practice just arises when it's meant to arise. Okay. Before, it might be something you had to apply, you had to do, but it becomes much more spontaneous. The vipassana, the wisdom, the prajna comes through spontaneously. Spontaneously, it's seen that there's no self, no ego. Spontaneously, it's seen there is no subject-object duality. You know, these things all arise. And it's very wholesome because it's underpinned by this beautiful presence, this sattvic quality of presence and knowingness there. Okay. Now, what can happen is that as the mind becomes clearer and it becomes divested and purified of rajas and tamas, the mind becomes your seeing of what's happening becomes clearer. And then what happens as you're functioning every day as a human being, it's less, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. It's, oh, this is happening. Oh, that is happening. Oh, Tom, the body mind, is doing such and such. Oh, Tom is thinking such and such. And there's a much clearer, more objective seeing of what's happening. And in that, the sense of doership can start to diminish. Because there's a natural arising of things in my field of experience, what we normally call consciousness. In my awareness, in my consciousness, things are happening. Oh, Sarah is thinking this now. Oh, she's responding in a really appropriate way there. Oh, fantastic. That's interesting. Oh, I think that's interesting. That's another thing I'm noticing. You see? Oh, Sarah responded there. It wasn't so skillful in that response there. I wonder what she could have done differently. Oh, she could have done X a bit differently. She could have done Y a bit differently. How interesting, you see? And it's all unfolding. Notice the commentary. Oh, isn't it interesting? Yeah. What happens at first, which may have happened with you a bit, is that you start to see the body-mind more objectively as it actually is. You're not detaching yourself. You're still there, but there's a natural detached seeing, or unbiased. What's happened, the biases, the beliefs have started to fall away. The illusions are starting to fall away. So everything's clearer, crisper. But then there's this second ego that comes in, as it were. It says, oh, look what's happening. The sense of doership's falling away. Yeah? And that new ego has not been objectified. That is now the new subject. It's not the real subject, it's the new ego. Do you see? And that ego starts to commentate on this new paradigm. Oh, I no longer have this sense of doership anymore, do I? Thought. Oh, the backgrounds keep on changing. I'm a bit flustered by this. So the new ego comes in. That's noticing that the doership has fallen away. This is all genuine insight happening. But see how the ego sneaks in. Yeah? So that's one thing to recognize, is that there's a new commentator now. It's the same ego.
Still laughing.
That was so funny. Because I forget, I'm talking to Sarah and I forget Gordon's there and I hear his voice. I was like, is that Sarah's laugh? Sarah, next time mute yourself and
Yeah, I'm going to mute myself
then
now.
tell me to shut up. And then you can unmute yourself. And so this second commentator comes in and starts commenting on all the insights that are happening, that are genuinely arising, because the ego naturally wants to be in control and commentate and understand, because the ego is looking for a foothold, is looking for knowledge, it's looking for understanding, so it can figure out where it's at, so it can get to so it can get to its treasure, so it can get to its greedy place. Yeah. So one thing you can do is notice how the commentary comes in and objectify that. Notice that's another phenomena arising. That's not you. So that's one thing you can do. Okay. There is another aspect to what's happened to you as well, which is to do with sensory overload. Okay. Okay. How can I explain this? If you're in a really loud place, yeah, but you've got your phone, yeah, you've got your smartphone, and you're like, I don't know, swiping away. I don't know, what do people do on their smartphone? I don't know, it's texting away, swiping away, Instagram, whatever you're doing stuff on your phone, and you're not really paying that much attention to the world around you. You're in this really loud, overly stimulating place, but you're on your phone. Maybe you've got your headphones plugged in. I don't know, but you're distracted from what's going on. Okay. And yeah, you've got your headphones plugged in, let's say, and you're, watching a YouTube video, listening to a podcast, doing some texting at the same time, checking your emails at the same time. You're not really aware of what's happening around you properly. You're just not. And you're fine with that. You're enjoying being on your phone. You're engrossed in your podcast, your music, and your texting or whatever. Now suddenly someone comes along and whips those headphones out of your ears and takes away your phone and chucks it away. And suddenly you're left with this place. And there's such a difference. Now you start noise, overstimulation, visual stimulation, auditory stimulation, maybe all this different stuff, all these different things coming in. And it's like, oh, what a contrast, you see. So why have I given this analogy? Well, being on your phone has helped you cope with this sensory overload, actually. Being distracted by your phone and getting used to that state has helped you cope and has desensitized you to that environment around you. Do you see? So when someone takes that phone away, which is the method by which you are coping and desensitizing yourself from the surroundings so you're not overwhelmed, you're now confronted with this reality, and it's such a contrast. In the same way, egoic thinking is like that. It's like that cell phone. Egoic thinking is something that's going round and round and round and round in our minds, consciously or unconsciously. Even when you're not consciously thinking, the momentum of ego is revolving, perpetuating itself, constantly saying that I'm a limited person living in a world. I'm a subject. There is a subject and object duality going on here. Yeah, and there's a preoccupation with that. Your attention in the same way your attention's on the phone and you're listening to the music, your attention's taken towards this thinking process. Yeah. When this thinking process comes less and less and less, that thinking process, also desensitizes you to what's going around you. You don't notice the world around you so much. You become desensitized to it. You're not as sensitive to what's happening. You're not as aware. Sensitive means to be aware, to be able to respond, to notice what's happening. This is what like if you've got a very sensitive instrument, if you're measuring something, you're very sensitively, any change, like if you've got very sensitive weighing scales, any change in weight will be picked up by the scale. Yeah? If your weighing scale is not very sensitive, it won't really pick up the subtle change in weight. This won't register. So the ego desensitizes the senses, desensitizes our intuition, actually, and our connection, and our wisdom coming through. So when the ego starts to go, what can happen is it all this stuff that was always there. You know, I'm sure you've been to your mum's house before. I'm sure, you know, it hasn't completely radically transformed into Piccadilly Circus overnight or something, you know. But now what's happening as you're getting this new perspective, there's less distraction from what's going on, and there can be a lot of sensory overload. Okay, and so there can be a process where the body mind on the body mind level has to adjust. And sometimes the way to adjust is like, okay, I need to put the headphones back in for a bit. Yeah, I've listened to these headphones all my life. Yeah, whip them out, and it's too much for me. I just put them in for half an hour now. Yeah, I'll take them out after half an hour. But I need to go back to something. I need a crutch I can go back to. Yeah, and if you follow the traditional path, if you have a bhakti devotion, God in your on your journey, you will naturally, if you're lucky, your intuition will guide you back to devotion. Because in the devotion, what you're doing, you're taking respite in the Lord. You're taking respite in the divine essence, which is your own true self anyway. And that is protecting you from all this sensory overwhelm. This is why bhakti is such an important part of the journey. Because when you come across all these difficulties and these hurdles, and I bet, Sarah, you wouldn't even have imagined this would be a problem you came across, you know? It's not something and it's not something I've spoken about with you. So because it's come up now, I'm speaking about it. And so when this happens, you go back to the bhakti. If you've got the bhakti there as a foundation, it will always come back to rescue you when you need it. So when you do that, this is why I asked you, when the overwhelm, that sensory overwhelm, which is just too much, your mind can't deal with it all, it starts to dissipate with bhakti. But don't be afraid to retreat back into the mind, to allow the body to adjust, allow the mind to adjust. Or if you can go into the self, as it were, and realize that none of this sensory overload is going to bother you anyway. But once you get into that second ego, which is commentating, that second ego can build up a sense of panic. And that's that commentary you're kind of referring to, like, oh gosh, am I going crazy? Oh gosh, am I going mad? Because something unusual is happening, the mind starts to panic. Now, if you realize the panic, what you didn't do, I don't think, do correct me if I'm wrong, but what you didn't do was you weren't able to see that as just the natural functioning of the mind. In the same way you were able to see your decision making earlier as a natural functioning, that's just arising, nothing to do with you, it's impersonal. That sense of panic felt very personal. You see? So if you actually allow that sense of panic to come into you, and you're sattvic and you're strong, then it will just be another phenomena that's just happening by itself, and it's non-personal. There's nothing to worry about, and it will never harm you because you're the self, and it's not fundamentally real. These are all empty phenomena.
That really makes sense. I would never have figured that out. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. I'm glad you asked that question, you see. And I mean, that's the way these teachings work. I would never have taught that to anybody. All of that stuff I just spoke about, I would never have taught that unless you asked that question. So that's why I say we co-create the teachings. The teachings they're all in me, as it were. And you just need to take a fishing rod and, you know, cast it into me, and then fish out, and then you'll fish out the teaching. Yeah. But without you, I don't say the teaching. I don't even know the teaching always.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome, sir. Well done, Gordon.
Actually, can I say, is it like the ego is not allowed in the front door anymore, so it's coming round the side door?
Yes.
Where you didn't
Yes.
He didn't think he was going to come in the side door because he'd never come in the side door. Always come in the front door.
It's always the same door, but you're right. It's just, it just looks like he's clever, he's crafty. That's the policeman. Sorry, that's the thief pretending to be the policeman to catch the thief. You see, the ego comes back and goes, "Don't worry, I've got the situation sorted now. I've seen through the doership, done that. I've realized myself, I've done that. I've got it sorted now. It's okay, everyone. You can go home. Nothing to see here, guys. Nothing to see here. I've realized the self. I'm good." And then the ego's back on his throne again. You see? It's the thinking, me keeps on coming back. When you get a sense, a taste of ego, when that ego comes back, you're like, "Oh, I can smell it. I can smell that. I smell you. I can taste you. I can sense. I can sense who you are now. I don't need to think about it. It's like playing tennis. I know that shot wasn't good. I can feel it wasn't good on my racket. The way it felt when I swung, when I did that backhand, I can feel that shot wasn't right. I don't need to think about it because it's now that knowledge is being integrated into me. That wisdom has been integrated into me. I know the ego. I can feel it. So, but yes, it comes in through the back door. Yeah, when you're not aware of what's happening, the ego pretends to be you. You see, that's the trick. The thinking pretends to be you. Thinking comes in and goes, "Oh, I'm feeling really scared now. I'm going to go mad." That's not you. That's just the thought arising. But it pretends to be you. And that's the trick it plays. That's why it's called the false self. Because it's not the true self. Self means you, what you are. It's just a fancy word, or maybe not that fancy, but it's a slightly fancy word for meaning you. So it's the false self, meaning it's not really you. But it pretends it's you, and you somehow believe it. Now, if you want to be really accurate, you actually never believe it. It's the false self that believes in the false self.
Wow.
You are never subject. You actually never. As the ego falls away, these teachings become clearer and clearer, because the ego is the distorting factor. And as when ego is very strong, that's tamas. When it gets weaker, that's rajas. As it gets weaker still, it's mixed sattva. As the ego gets weaker and weaker still, it's sattva. When the ego is gone, that's pure sattva, or jnana, wisdom, self-realization. You see? But this is the distorting factor getting less and less and less. And as the distorting factor, which is the ego, which is ignorance, gets less and less and less, the veil clears, demists, and you can see things more clearly. And you realize that there was never any illusion. There was never any ignorance. There was never any ego. It was all an illusory process. So you never actually ever believe you're the ego. It's just the ego believing it's the ego.
So presumably it has a finite number of tricks.
It's got one trick.
Ah.
One trick.
Oh, that's good.
Yes. But it will use. It's like that magician, one trick, and it just uses that one trick again and again and again, and you get fooled every time. And it's got different variations. It's got countless variations of the one trick. And the one trick it has is called ignorance. And it's when it pretends to be you. That's the only trick. And you believe it. But you never really believe it. Because you're the self. The self never believes anything. The belief itself is within the domain of the ego. There's kind of hypnosis going on. It's kind of I don't know, seeming entanglement where there is none really.
So as it's becoming more subtle, is it becoming less powerful?
Yes.
To manage?
Yes, it's becoming, well, not necessarily easier to manage, but it's becoming less powerful. It might, I mean, easier to manage. It may not feel like that subjectively.
Mm.
Objectively speaking, meaning like rationally speaking, yes, it's easier to manage. It's more subtle, but it may feel, you, for example, you might storm through the first part of your spiritual journey really well. You know, as you get through a lot, you might do a lot of healing. You might cleanse yourself a lot of addictions or whatever issues, traumas. And then you can. So actually, the ego is thinned a lot. But then you hit a wall at the subtle points. So it doesn't always feel, from the seeker's point of view, easier to manage.